Welcome to this week's Aiding Your Game. In the last few series, we have gone through and started building an adventure from scratch using random rolls out of the DM's guide, some creativity to give it some flesh. We've assembled a skeleton, we've put some flesh on those bones. Now it's time to put a bow on it and get it into a finished format. So let's jump into it. Now, before we dive in, please make sure you go down and hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. Leave a comment down below so that we can help interact with you better, find out what type of videos would really help up your game. And if you don't mind getting the notifications, hit that bell. In the last video, we went through and started putting the encounters in place, decided how that adventure is going to progress for the player characters. We filled out some more details on stats for what the encounters are going to do based on the CR levels of the chosen level and number of players. Now we just need to put a bow on it and give it some life. So for me, I have a pretty simple process that I use. I look at the encounters that we've built, and we know we're going to have a starting point, which is the waypoint. The adventurers are going to be experiencing this adventure on their way to their hometown. So we have our endpoint, and then we assign the encounters that they'll encounter for this adventure. Now we're not going to go through each and every one of them. We'll go through one and really assign details, and then I'm going to do it off camera. I'd love to see what you do with yours if you're following along. And then after we get all of the details put together, kind of do some refinements on the maps, I'm going to present it in a format in our next video that you can follow along with and see the adventure unfold as if you were experiencing it at my game table. And as mentioned, once this is all done and formatted, and we'll put it in a nice, friendly, viewable, downloadable document, I'm going to add it to DriveThruRPG or DM's Guild, and you'll be able to download it for free. So how do we really put a bow on it and make it come to life for our players? So for me, what I do is I go through and do just a quick summary so I can really wrap my head around it and get some starting ideas of how I'm going to flesh it out. I'll be sure to include some videos so you can see what I've written down. So I go through and I look at who, what, where, when, why, and how for each of the encounter locations, which gives me a good idea of what I need to put in each of those encounters. And then with those encounters, I also look at the 5 senses. And for that, I go with what's the most impactful for us as players. Generally, those are sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste, in that order for how they impact us when we're collecting data from the real world. So my overarching who, what, where, when, why, and how. So the who of the overall is going to be 6 player characters of level 1. The what? Journeying home. So we're going to put this premise as each of the player characters having the town of Thedius as their hometown. Now this may be a little bit railroady, but again, we're doing this as just a starting point, a starting adventure, something to start collecting people around a table. So this could easily just be a one-shot, and then moving into further opportunities for the players to create their own unique characters with their own unique backstories and their own unique hometowns going forward. But with that being said, because we're assigning a hometown to each of the player characters, we want to make sure that the players are comfortable working with the DM in that premise. We're going to set that out at the very beginning as we're gathering a group, that this is one of the requirements for playing in this adventure. And each of the player characters can then work with the DM on where they were for their backstory or their background, and then why they're now heading home in an adventurer's life. So we've covered the where of the hometown and the old path from the waypoint to the hometown. As for the when, it's going to be one day. When it occurs is going to be from morning to night. So one day is the when. Now the why, we're going to put a couple of pieces on that why. The primary piece is they're going home. But additionally, we know that one of the NPCs is going to be a patron. So we'll assign the patron the name of Palarian, which I used when I was putting the commoner stats for the NPC down, just to give him a name. And then the how, they're going to confront the cultists and defeat our villain of Awfulheim. So that's the who, what, where, when, why, and how of our overall adventure. Just using notepaper, here's the information I filled out on the overarching who, what, where, when, why, and how. Now, as I dive into the location pieces, the encounter pieces, that's where I do kind of the same thing, in that I list the who, what, where, when, why, and how, so that I can think about the interaction pieces that I need to provide to the players so that they can get a sense of what's going on in their first location. And that's where the 5 senses really come into play as I'm building out the encounter locations. Now, these should be pretty interesting and in-depth, because this is the information we're going to relay to the players so that they can interact with our world and the adventuring environment. So here's what I use when I'm starting to fill in that information. Again, just using notepaper. Here's the location sheet that I'm going to fill out, utilizing the who, what, where, when, why, and how, as well as the senses that the characters will be experiencing in each location. Now I'll do one of these per encounter. Now let's go through and fill this out. So for our who, what, where, when, why, and how, we have our patron, who I've named Palarian. And I'm just going to be filling out the sheet as we go through and cover each of these pieces. Again, we're not going to do it for each of the locations. I'm going to do that separately, but we want to do this for each of the adventure locations. And we'll go through those after we complete this first format. So we know the waypoint is going to start at an inn. I've lovingly called it the Green Oaks Inn, which is a staple in any of my adventures and campaigns. So for the Green Oaks Inn, which is the waypoint where the adventure starts, we know we're going to have our patron, Palarian, the PCs, and we'll throw in a couple other NPCs of a couple of merchants, the innkeep, a patron, and the inn's cook. Now you can definitely throw in more NPCs. Just remember, sometimes less is more, because if you number 100 NPCs and the PCs want to interact with those NPCs, you've got to come up with 100 different NPCs to have them interact with. So sometimes less is more. You can say there are various other patrons there. However, they all seem uninteresting or uninterested in what's going on. So for Palarian, we have the who, the what, he's escaping cultists. Where, he's running to the inn to get help from the town of Thedius. When, first thing in the morning. We're going to have an adventuring day, so we want to start early in the morning and have the adventuring day go through the day and into the evening or night. And why is he running to the inn, escaping Thedius? Because of the cultists who are overtaking Thedius from the previous night. And how? He's on foot. He's running for his life. He's trying to get help and bring it back to Thedius to save his children and the community that he loves. Now the next are the PCs. Again, who are they? You should have that in your notes. What are they doing? They've just spent the night because of the torrential rains, which meant they weren't able to actually make it home the previous night. So they had to stay in the inn because the rains drove them in, and they were planning on going home to their hometown the next day. So we'll start them out in the morning, preparing to leave. Of course, from the Green Oaks Inn. As for the other NPCs, we can just quickly fill in the same thing. They're traveling through. It's early morning. They're preparing to leave. The cook is cooking the breakfast meals, and the innkeep is counting out all of the take from the previous night. And by jotting those notes down, we now have a good idea of what's going on at the start of the adventure. We can quickly describe the interactions that PCs can have with others around them. But to add more depth to that, I want to go through and look at what are the sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch that the NPCs experience. And the reason this is important is so that we can really describe it and drive more immersion for the players so that they really get a sense of the game world and what their PCs are experiencing. Because roleplay is experiencing through your character. So for the NPCs, what are the sights they're going to see this bright morning at the Green Oaks Inn? Well, we already kind of decided through filling out our who's there list that torrential rains drove them into the inn. So we want to say that with those torrential rains, now all of a sudden it's bright blue skies with puddles on the ground. A few people are moving about the inn, enjoying their breakfast and packing their gear. The cook shuffles from table to table, setting down bowls of porridge. The innkeep at the counter is counting out and jotting down in a ledger different silver coins. And just like that, we have a good visual of what's going on. Now we can add in a few more details of what the inn looks like and what the construction is, how people are dressed. The more details we give, we can bring more and more reality into this RPG. However, again, we don't want to do too much. We want to give good details but not overwhelm. We don't want this to take an hour just to describe what they see at the inn, because there are more senses that are going to have just as important of an impact to your players. So we've got the visceral description that we're going to provide to our players. Now the next impactful sense is sound. So what do the PCs hear? Well, the shuffling of the merchants who are both eating hurriedly as well as packing their gear, the clanking of the coins being stacked on the wood counter. Because it's early morning, we want to have a rooster crowing. And then additionally, I want to add in one sound, which is going to be our NPC Patron, but I'm going to save that for last. Next impactful sense is going to be smell. What do the PCs smell? Obviously, the porridge that the cook has made, which smells earthy but almost a bit grassy in nature. The fresh, clean air from the rain the previous night before. Now we've covered 3 of the senses, and generally you want to stick with 4, not all 5. So we've got touch and taste left. Both of these are good senses to use in different situations because they're at an inn, they've got breakfast porridge going on, there's lots of activity around with the innkeep counting coins, the cook going and moving porridge around. Porridge seems like the most important aspect of what we've already described as far as the other senses. So we can talk about the taste of the porridge. Have it be something that's kind of bland and, while filling, not very flavorful, so we can touch on that taste. So a quick recap as we're describing the scene to our players to set the mood. We've got a bright blue sky with puddles on the ground. We've got merchants who are packing their gear and eating. We've got the cook moving around, placing bowls of porridge on the various tables before the patrons, and the innkeep, who is currently behind the counter, stacking coins and writing in a ledger. The sound of the merchants hurriedly eating as they're packing their gear, the clanking of coins on wood, and a rooster crowing outside in the fresh, clean air from the previous night rain. The steaming porridge smells earthy and grassy, and it tastes bland, just a mixture of warm milk and ground oats. It's a pretty good description of what the characters are experiencing in the moment. Now, to add back into that, to get the hook, to get everything started, we need to have some type of an action description, and that's where I'm going to focus on sound. And that's after we give the description of what they're experiencing in the moment, we break in with that action. I'm going to put a agonizing scream that cuts through the morning rituals and is a yell for help. This is how we introduce our NPC, who's the patron, Polari, and get everything moving. Now, hopefully the characters, after feeling kind of this warm, safe, breakfast morning-y thing, it's calm, it's clear from the rains the previous night, it's a cleansing kind of setting that we've given them, all of a sudden to introduce a scream for help the player characters should at that point be interested enough to this break of calmness to go and investigate what's going on. And that's where we utilize the stage setting of what is going on with Polarian. As the PCs jump up and run outside to investigate, we can describe that an older man is currently being captured by the cultists and give additional description of, again, what the NPC looks like. He should be almost frail and weak, exhausted, sweating, simple clothing, gasping for air from running. And the cultists, who are somehow identified as leather armored, but definitely not friendly city guards. So you can describe possibly a black leathered armor with a red crest in the center, who are currently attempting to grab and drag our patron back too. Now the players should want to investigate this and see what's going on, and that's where we start the storytelling piece, so that they can, through either attacking or negotiating or investigating, find out that the cultists are trying to get this NPC and drag him back. The NPC, meanwhile, should be begging for help. His children are on the path behind. He's been running all night. The city has been usurped by Offelheim and his cultists. Please, can you save me? And with those pieces, we started a nice, calm, descriptive morning, and all of a sudden the characters are thrust into the action. Now, once the PCs deal with the cultists there, whether it's by combat or negotiation or however the PCs handle it, we know that the NPC patron should be begging them to complete an adventure based on their path. It's the location piece, and the patron is there to kind of spur them on and get them moving in the right direction and make sure that they are focused on that adventure setting. That's our patron NPC. One way that I'm going to do that is the other NPC, the ally, is actually the patron's son, who through the night and early morning has run with his son and two daughters trying to escape. This should give additional reason for the PCs to take on that adventure that they're going to experience going to their hometown. And because we have that story progression, we know the next step for them is going to be going through the swamps, where we've got another encounter planned. And as they move into that encounter location, we're going to repeat this process step by step for the swamp, then the hill, then the river crossing, finally the town where they're going to meet Offelheim. We're not going to do this all on camera. Again, I'm going to do this separately, but I wanted you to see the steps that I take, how I utilize the senses and my questions of who, what, where, when, why, how to build the scene that the encounter is going to take place. And of course, off camera, I'm going to be working on all of that, getting everything put together. Probably going to refine the map a little bit, just because I am a very visual person. It's one of the things I like to include in my adventures, are things that players can interact with and really help with that immersive state. I'm going to get all of these notes assembled, put together in a good format, and I'm going to get them uploaded so that you can download them should you like, and be able to play through this adventure at your own tables. Whether you're experienced or a new player, this will give you the tools to start gathering up some people, doing a one-shot, going through the adventure, experiencing some of the rules and systems of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and allow you to ultimately ask the question of, where will your adventures take you? Make sure to join me next week as I go through and narrate this adventure from start to finish, as if I were presenting to you being one of my players. I sure hope this series has been helpful in adventure building and encounter building and world building, and gets you creatively thinking about how you can better create and accentuate your adventure building tools. Again, if you've been following along, please let me know how you tackle the location or the encounter building steps, because I'd love to see the creativity that everybody's going to bring to this in their own unique and different way.